Hey, it's Coach T. This is the sixth video diary in my year-long self-documentation of my progress on learning C Sharp. So last week I said I had a busy week coming up with family travel, family events, stuff like that. So I wasn't expecting to get a whole lot done. I wasn't expecting to get a whole lot of practice done. But part of our travel plan fell through, and that gave me a couple extra days to practice and really dial down. So I kind of had to back up and say, all right, I was given this unexpected gift of 3 days. Other than going to the pool, spending time with my kids, spending time with my wife, how do I want to use those hours that I typically allocate towards studying or production or working on something? So what I did is I said, all right, I've got two things I need to really dial in on. I need to work on object-oriented programming in C Sharp, because I had started working through the Udemy course, the Christina Sluzik's 2024 Ultimate C Sharp Mastery class, and also R.B. Whitaker's C Sharp Player's Handbook. And I hit classes and I was just confused. Like, I understood how they work because I had experience with that in Python. I understood the purpose, but where I was really getting tied down was understanding the difference between public and private fields, public and private methods, and then how to pass information back and forth in order to build the machine, as it were. So I said I need a project to work on, and we were going out to my dad's to go watch one of the Bills' preseason games. So I said, can I do this in football? I had already written a text-based Python football game as an experiment, but it was classless. It was non-object oriented. It was, what's the procedural programming from top to bottom, with most of the game in functions and then a single game loop that called on functions to do things. And that was done not on purpose to avoid object-oriented programming, but rather as practice in writing functions and then managing the returns to do control flow. And I worked on that with a couple of the people that I am working through Python with. Like I said, I'm part of a number of adult learning networks. Different people are doing Python or SQL or C Sharp with me. So there's usually somebody to work with, and so we were playing with that. But this one, C Sharp FOOPBall, as I'm going to show you, entirely from the scratch, from the ground up. It's my work. It wasn't a project that was in a book or a course. It wasn't a specific like goal to release piece of software. It was, I want to make a game with classes. I want to map it out beforehand. I knew what sort of moves you need in order to have a football game as a minimum viable product. You know, you need to be able to pass, run a play, you need to be able to kick, you need to be able to punt, you need to be able to score and then choose kick the extra point or attempt a 2-point conversion. You need to be able to track progress on the field. And the reason I actually abandoned the Python version of this is because I wasn't able to get the field rendering the way that I wanted it to in the console window. And the big thing is I needed to have 3 classes. Class game that had most of the rules, most of like the current updating information, as well as a bunch of functions that would manage the other 2. And then class team that I could call on in order to quickly draw up 2 teams that we could call on to keep track, and then even enter in some customization capabilities, and that's in the game now. And then the last one is class scoreboard, and class scoreboard is really the interface of the entire thing. It's a console app, so it's going to be ugly, but I wanted to be able to track progress and then have a scoreboard that shows up so that you can, every single round, you can see exactly what's going on. You can track downs, you can track yards, you can track current yards. The original version had a red zone versus field goal light that would go on, or a colored line. But I don't think it's in this version of it. I think it never made it over from the Python version. So anyway, this took me about 12 hours, and I wrote it twice from scratch. The first time I was like, I'm going to work with Christina's videos, I'm going to work with R.B. Whitaker's classes chapter, and then as absolutely necessary, where that's not enough and my own notes aren't enough, I'll clarify with Gemini, the online large language model. But I had to do very little of that. There was one instance where I was completely befuddled. And I was like, what is wrong with this? And it turns out it was the this keyword for parameters, which I hadn't encountered. I had no idea it even existed. I guess it's similar to Python's self syntax for classes, but I don't know that for sure, and I haven't even gotten that far in Christina's videos on classes. So with just what I knew, I was like, let's build a football game, be able to show my dad. It's going to have some jokes baked into it. And it kind of spiraled out from there. Version 2, which was the first non-Python version of FOOPBall, was a mess. It was spaghetti code because I really hadn't gotten down the differences between public and private. I was struggling with constructors. I was having a hard time with encapsulation. So I finished it. I got it to the point that you could run a game. It had a lot of randomization elements, more actually than I have in version 3, just because they were unnecessary. And it allowed you to save players to a list so you could recruit them. But that was a really interesting thing. Like, how do I build a list of lists? That was a very interesting step that I was able to take using just the basics of what I understood. But it ultimately didn't make it into version 3 because it didn't really matter. Originally, like it would allow you to do exactly what you see over here, which is player 1, what's your team name, and then it would say who's your QB, who's your center, who's your kicker, who's your primary running back, who's your primary receiver. But every time I booted the game up, I either had to have a line that just built that list for me and turned it into a passable parameter, or I was like, let's just strip it out because ultimately it doesn't matter. And that led me down some more interesting paths anyway, because I had to figure out how am I going to distinguish between the active team class that's playing in the game. So there were a lot of cognitive challenges, and I had an absolute blast creating a FOOPBall. Now, I know it's ugly, and Gemini's suggestion at the end of my project when I just asked for a kind of code review was to use Unity or Unreal Engine to make it look nicer. So we weren't on the same page about the aesthetic direction of this thing, but that's okay. So I'm just going to plug in 2 team names. It starts with player 1, what's your team name? Bills. It says something about your team. So this one says, you handsome lad, go Bills. You hit enter to progress, and we're going to pick the Broncos. Let's make sure I spell it right. If you spell it wrong, it'll just get saved in as your active team name, and it says good luck. So if you do invent one that's not one of the official 32 teams or whatever, you do get like a good luck message. It's kind of generic. So second best horse team incoming. And then we hit enter to progress, and boom, here is our rendered game. Rendered very, very generously. So we got our scoreboard, football game, Bills, Broncos, 0-0, game status, Bills have possession, 1-10. That's not random. It could be with a coin toss. I just have player 1 starting, but it really would be a trivial matter to decide who gets to start. So then here's what happens. So the end zone, I know the numbers should probably be reversed on the one side, but fight me. You start off at the 0, the current yard line. That was subject to some discussion back and forth with my buddies as I was showing them this. I'm probably going to randomize that. Between 0 and 35, I think. Gets you slightly past a touchback if you want. I could add the option right away, like how far do you want to retrieve it, but honestly, it's a console football game. I'm not trying to remake Madden. I just wanted to learn how to play with classes, So you got to call the play. So you got pass, rush, QB rush, punt, kick, field goal. If I were to kick a field goal from here, I have a 1 in 100 chance of doing it, I think. Basically, what's happening behind the hood is there are D30 rolls going on, and then based on what I could scrape from the NFL statistics webpage, the Next Gen Stats, I think, and I did not do a whole lot of research, but general, like, poking around, that's what I based the responsiveness to. So if you get higher than a certain threshold, then it happens. If you get way higher than a certain threshold, you get a bonus. And then if you roll a 1, which is a 1 in 30 chance, you either intercept or fumble, etc. So there's RPG mechanics going on here. But let's pass the ball. The Bills attempt to pass. We gained 20 yards. We definitely did not against the Steelers. That was a mess. But then you hit enter to progress the play, and you can see we've moved forward 20 yards. So we started from here. Now we've moved forward to the 20-yard line. We can attempt to rush the ball. We gained 4, and we don't move on because I don't have increments of 1 yards on here. There's not enough space on a console window. But it does report we've gotten 24 yards. It's 2 and 6. We'll do another pass, 3 yards gained, 3rd and 3. We'll do a pass, 2 yards gained, and 4 and 1. So, we are pretty close back. I guess I'm going to punt the ball. That was not a very productive first drive. So I'll punt the ball. I punt it from the 29-yard line, and now I kicked it all the way down there. It tells you what yard they punted it from, not how far we punted, but they're currently at their 28-yard line. It switches over. It says Broncos have possession, 1st and 10. So let's see if I can get one of these teams to score. 7 yards, 13 yards, just so we can see the end zone. Come on, Broncos. "21 yards gained." Okay. Oh, fumble. Okay, fumble, ball retrieve. Broncos maintain possession. Okay. 16 yards. All right, here we are. All right, so we're going to rush into the end zone. We're going to try and rush into the end zone. There we go, and now you can see my end zone, right? So touchdown, and then you see the fork. Here's my end zone rendered out, and you get a choice between kicking or attempting the 2-point conversion. We'll kick. We kicked it. And now you can see Broncos have 7. Bills now have possession. The way I'm doing that is by just keeping track of the turn. So the Bills or player 1 is always an odd or a modulo non-zero return value, whereas team 2, modulo 2 has to be exactly equal to 0. That's how I keep track. Every 4th down, every fumble, every interception, every touchdown, and every field goal will turn the turn over. Otherwise, the turn doesn't get affected at all. So it was a lot of fun to make this game. It was like 12 hours worth of practice between versions 2 and 3. I didn't record anything about me writing it. I did it a lot of it upstairs, so I could sit with my daughters and my wife, and kind of show my wife and joke about it as we went. But I learned a ton. I'm much more comfortable with public and private fields, public and private methods. I'm much more comfortable using a void method to adjust a field within a class. So I'm looking forward to the next step, which I think is polymorphism or inheritance in Christina's course. I did expression-bodied methods, which I could have benefited from that in this because I do have some very short methods that probably could just be an expression-bodied method. I haven't done the this keyword video, but I believe after that, and maybe a little bit more practice, we're into polymorphism, which I did that in Python for a couple of my Pygame projects, so I am familiar with it. The other thing that I decided to do, because time was growing short and I had finished this project, I didn't want to jump into the next segment of C# knowing we were going to be gone for several days, is I started teaching myself HTML and CSS. And I say teaching myself HTML and CSS, but really I did a bunch of it in high school, so this was a much more, hopefully, mature mind going through and very quickly reviewing and then expanding on what I knew. I was surprised because when I was first taught CSS, it was taught to us as if it was a spreadsheet. The values were all in spreadsheets, and I remember being very confused by the presentation and not understanding the purpose or why I couldn't just use HTML to do things, and not caring. This is really the bottom line there. I just didn't care at that point. We had other things going on. I had other things going on. I was working, and I didn't think there was any reason for me to learn CSS. Well, here I am again, almost 14 years later. So more than 14 years later. But it's very easy. Knowing C#, the syntax with curly braces and semicolons is at this point second nature. I don't know C#, but I'd say we're acquainted, given that FOOPBall exists. And HTML is easy. In fact, I was really shocked because I've spent a lot of time in Affinity Publisher too, in Microsoft Publisher, Microsoft Word, doing kind of nitty-gritty formatting things, and I've gotten very familiar with Microsoft's, especially Microsoft's Markdown language, and understanding what those symbols mean. So when I'm looking at an HTML document, all I'm seeing is whatever the name of Microsoft's Markdown language is. Most of the tags have similar names or very similar purposes. So looking at HTML, I was like, oh, okay, all right. And I blew through Free Code Camp's introductory HTML and CSS programs. And in Affinity Publisher 2, more so than in the other two software, I've done a lot of work with text styling, customizing text styling, and seeing how it's written out. The under the hood look, or the middle under the hood look, since I can't see the deeper stuff. So I was looking at CSS and I was like, oh, this is just a text style or a character style or whatever. So it really wasn't that intimidating, and I flew through. So I did something like 160, 170 of their micro lessons. I built their first two apps, in almost no time, maybe 3-4 hours combined. It was fascinating, but way less challenging than I expected. So at some point, when I get beyond the console stuff and I'm comfortable with polymorphism, inheritance, object-oriented programming, and whatever else is beyond that, I'm looking at maybe doing some sort of web app development, either for static pages, or I have a lot of need for a teaching-based web app that can allow us to perform calculations or process stuff. I got to look at security. That's a big thing. But there are other non-student data-based functions to which I can put something like a website that just has a list of calculations or a list of data points that we often refer to, and put it up there. So I'm looking forward to doing that, because writing the HTML was neat, and I can see how it connects to SQL. I can see how it connects to C#. I just don't know exactly what the shape of that skeleton is yet. So that's it. Wasn't a very learning intensive week. It was a very practice intensive week. But if you know, my learning philosophy is you should be doing 80% of your time practicing, 20% of your time studying. Whenever you sit down to do anything, learn anything, it should be almost all application, so that you rapidly build the context for why the next thing is important. And that's what this week was. This week was all context. I wrote methods. I wrote public methods. I wrote private methods. I wrote a whole bunch of variables and ran into variable naming issues. I wrote 6 or 7 classes and had to practice those. I spent a lot of time thinking about encapsulation and in a couple cases diagramming how things will be connected. I had to practice my multi-dimensional arrays to make my football field work. I had to practice some basic calculation stuff, making sure I'm really controlling the flow, if-thens, and also switch cases. I gained a new appreciation for how quickly it is to write a class and a method in Python, because it takes a little bit in C#. I mean, it's not as bad as C++, I guess, or C, but it takes a little while, And I gained a new appreciation for the debugging process. So a whole lot of new gains from doing something as simple and kind of stupid as FOOPBall, but I think it was worth it. It was a very fun way to spend my free time during the week. It was productive. So that's it. This next week I'm going in. It's my last real week of summer. I have one work day for sure, but I'm going to be hitting the books. The goal is to kind of try and finish out the next segment of her course, maybe before I'm back teaching full-time, or back coaching full-time, I guess. So that way I can just do a little bit of it in the evenings, get my practice out, and do a little bit more on the weekends. Then I can be fully focused at work. So that's it. That's my C# devlog check-in. It's a little bit longer than I intended, but that seems to keep happening. This week there's more Python videos coming up, and then the Affinity Publisher 2 playlist is 99% complete and should be, I think it's out at the end of September or the beginning of October, I think. It's 24 videos long, including some guided projects. So that's it. More C#. We're getting past the point I was comfortable with in Python. We're either there or we're very close at this point. And I don't feel any slowdowns. I don't feel any discouragement. I'm just ready to keep learning. So I will check in with you again in a week. And hopefully in a year from now I look back at this and I go, you're right, you should have used Unity. That thing is fugly. See ya.